activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. And thanks for being here in this interesting, intriguing, difficult workshop on organizing heritage entities for sustainable development. I will make a short introduction, 5 minutes. First, I'll introduce quickly Dan Shoup, Jane Thompson, Maria Luciani, that are the 3 speakers with us today. So basically we have a short introduction, and then each of us will present 10 minutes based on our research and work in respectively in Turkey, Italy, Machu Picchu, and China. And then we have discussion. So the idea of this session is, let me start from quoting Gramsci, the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. And here, in talking with new approaches in heritage, as in old approach in heritage, there is that we miss something very important, which is management. Management not intended as a kind of very self-referential, technocratic discipline, but just trying to understand, the conditions of sustainability, feasibility of organizations from a point of view of a lot of things that are normally studied in the management field are very rarely understood in the heritage field, to be honest. When I talk with heritage people about management, they have the impression of talking about audience development and communication, perhaps, and fundraising. That's it. And there is much more than that. There is much more to take from management, and particularly there are these 4 elements which are very rarely addressed in any discussion about heritage so far. One is the institutional design, the issue of how you define the boundaries of an organization, which is a specific organization that has to deal with heritage, but anyhow is an organization. And the hidden assumption is always that we are dealing with autonomous entities, which is not the case in many, many public sector in countries where arts and heritage has to deal with public sector. So most of the time you have organization that, more than being non-profit organizations, they are known organizations. They are part of the ministry, they are part of the local branch or the local government or whatever. And we simply pretend that it is not. So we start with the hidden assumption. Let's take that they are autonomous entities and blah, 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 everything follows. Unfortunately, if they are not autonomous, perhaps we have to we should address our attention in a completely different ways. And particularly this context, what really matters is the differences between different countries. And I guess that one of the things that is really missing in this field is a kind of international comparison. All of us trying to work on a kind of autarkic environment where it's very rare to find a paper that has comparing two different sites, archaeological sites, arts organizations, heritage organizations into different countries. We have from time to time some books where different chapters are not real dialoguing between themselves, just presenting in separate way local different situations. Comparative analysis is something completely different. The second aspect, which is really very important, is really the financial business model. And that's a very technical word. I'm not saying business in the sense that heritage organizations should behave like business in the sense of making profit, but in the sense of economic entities, whether they are not profit maximizer or not even try to achieve profit. But there are ways in which they work, and there are revenues and costs, or without entering too much into technical details, which are so important, particularly when they are hidden by strange institutional design. Then there is a chapter which is really the less interesting perhaps for heritage people, which is human resource managing people. I mean, I remember decades of debate in Italy about how boring that the superintendent should deal with the question of people. Yes, you have to. You're not an academic. You are a person in charge of an organization. An organization, particularly in this field, is dealing with people. Sometimes smart people, sometimes less smart people, including ourselves. Then the last point, which is really the more difficult perhaps to study, to understand, is decision making. You know, most of the time we start a very simply view of managing. We start with mission statements. We start to oversimplify things rather than understanding the complicated context of decision making, which is something we as management experts can really help a lot of people inside the organization. So this is the kind of things we are talking, and I'm done with my introduction, so I will stop the sharing my monitor. And we have very different cases here. Dan will talk about Turkey, Jane will talk about Italy, Maria will talk about Machu Picchu, and I will talk about China. So it doesn't really matter where do you come from. The problem is how you look at, what kind of context do you look at. So Dan, the screen is yours. That's how we say at distance.
Thank you, Professor Zahn.
Oh, well, that's...
Let me So today I'd like to share with you some of the lessons we can learn about the first site management plan for the historic peninsula of Istanbul, which was prepared in 2011 and revised in 2018. I should mention my name is Daniel Shoup. I'm a cultural heritage consultant based in Oakland, California, in the private sector. The historic sites of Istanbul were inscribed on the World Heritage List in 1985 and include the 4 areas you see on this map. Including the Topkapi Palace, the Hagia Sophia, the Süleymaniye Mosque complex built by Mimar Sinan in the 16th century, the area of Zeyrek, which includes this 12th century church of the Pantokrator, and an area of wooden houses, which obviously have some conservation issues. And of course, the land walls of Theodosius, which were built in the 5th century AD and form the boundary of the historic peninsula of the city. Besides these areas which are on the World Heritage List, the historic peninsula as a whole has thousands more monuments and sites which require management and conservation interventions. Beginning in the 1990s, as many of you know, UNESCO began demanding that World Heritage Sites adopt conservation and management plans, and was bothering Turkey for many, many years and threatening to embarrass it by placing the Istanbul on the list of sites in danger. Turkey's response was started in 2004 with reforms that allowed municipalities to start their own heritage agencies. And in 2006, the city of Istanbul created an entity called the Istanbul Site Management Directorate to deal with some of the management problems of the World Heritage Site. In 2008, the planning area was set, and the plan was developed in 2009 and between 2009 and 2011. Something to note is that the Site Management Directorate itself, although part of the municipality, had no powers of land use management, a small staff, an honorary director, and no budget. In 2007 and 8, there was discussion between UNESCO and Turkey about the planning area for the management area for the World Heritage Site. UNESCO suggested the entire Bosphorus Straits, as you see on the left, including the Prince's Islands and the historic peninsula. Turkey insisted on sticking to the historic peninsula, both the World Heritage Sites, which you see in red on the right-hand diagram, and the historic peninsula as a whole, which you see in the green stripes. The planning process itself for this management plan included 4 phases. One was largely informational, to educate stakeholders on the plan and the planning process, and to get ideas and information about the existing situation. Phase 2 was a participatory process of generating ideas from stakeholders that shaped the framework of the plan. They used a design charrette style and classic strategic planning tools, such as mission statements, vision statements, SWOT analysis. Phase 3 fleshed out ideas from phase 2 into an architecture of goals, strategies, actions, and projects. And this third phase was really a milestone in communication between the many agencies in Istanbul, which have some control over land use planning and thereby over cultural heritage. The first draft was completed in 2011. It was approved at the end of 2011 and revised in 2018. The 2011 plan has 4 sections in 470 pages. There's a background, there's a management plan, project packages, and then an implementation phase. The background section is very long. It's 132 pages, and this is appropriate because there are 42 different public administrations that have some role in land use planning in this very small geographical area. There are also over 10,000 registered cultural properties, most of which are in the private sector. There are at least 5 different plans administering land use in the area. Excuse me. And you can see the way that attention is addressed in the plan overall from the introduction. Planning and zoning are discussed in great detail, while the discussion of cultural heritage is much more superficial and less well developed. Section 2 of the plan presents the classic management tools of SWOT analysis, a vision statement, thematics, the themes unifying the peninsula's conservation issues, 22 different planning principles, and then those are further detailed into 51 goals, 85 strategies, and 183 different actions. So we move from the very general, we have a statement of vision, to themes, to principles, to goals, strategies, and actions. It's like a very tall cake, which gets successively slightly more articulated as you go down to the bottom of the layers. The 7 themes are here. You'll see that none of them are really related to the specialties of archaeologists or conservators per se. These were identified by stakeholders and are certainly relevant to managing cultural heritage. But you'll see that there is, compared to overall urban planning issues, there is a lack of attention to the issues that archaeologists or conservators might be most concerned about. Although the identification of problems is spot on. I mean, there really are many administrative problems that a plan like this can and should address. The third section of the plan. So the first one was the introduction. The second one was this framework of planning ideas. The third one details project packages, which are meant to be, how do you implement this framework of goals, strategies, and actions? There are 49 project packages, 30 for the thematic areas, those 7 themes that I briefly showed you, and 19 for the World Heritage Sites themselves. Each of them is a 1-page project table with 1 or 2 pages of text. And very few of them really relate directly to conservation or restoration, but rather are interested in how to change legislation, how to produce, to improve infrastructure, how to initiate public-private partnerships to gain funds for conservation interventions. And there are many plans to make plans. The problems overall in the document are very clearly articulated, but the answers are somewhat less well articulated. And there is no mention of money. So this, for instance, is the entire text of one of the project packages, which is the Roman numeral 2 is for theme number 2, project package 8. And this is one of the most specific to conservation that we have. But at the end of the day, what we have here, when this project is completed, we will have an implementation guide and 3 frameworks. There will be no actual conservation or evaluation work having taken place after this project would be completed. The last output is wonderful. It's not the creation of an urban archaeological agency, but the definition of a framework for the preparation of a recommendation to create one. It's like much of this plan, it's a little bit of like being in a fun house or a circus where you have all the mirrors that reflect each other. You try to get close to the cultural heritage and it keeps getting farther away. So this gives unusual significance to the issue of implementation. And this is the 4th section of the plan. Where it discusses existing institutions, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation, and it summarizes in 14 pages all of the different public administrations, of which there are 42, which have some role in land use planning in the peninsula. But the budgeting section really has no numbers whatsoever. And really the only effect that this plan will have on budgeting is perhaps to unify the accounting formats of all the different public entities involved. In 2018, the plan was revised after a 4-year process of consultation. One of the major problems of the plan, that is the fact that the site management agency created by the municipality in 2006, that agency had 5 staff, an honorary director, and no budget, and no power to change anybody's land use practices, really more of a secretarial department. That entity was merged with other entities of the municipality into a cultural assets conservation department, which does have a budget, which does have technical staff, and interacts with the planning department of the municipality in a more concrete way. The revision of the plan articulated some very good critiques of the original plan, namely that the architecture of goals, strategies, and actions and project packages was very confusing and very redundant. And also mentions that only 23 of the 183 actions listed were able to be implemented by 2018. The revision also raised this fundamental question: was the 2011 plan trying to be a policy document or a document that guided actual interventions at heritage sites? And this is really an epistemological issue that was not solved in the original plan and was not solved in the revision. The question, at least, was raised, though. However, the 2018 revision did not really change the structure of the goals, strategies, and actions. Rather, it added some additional plans made for the Eurasia Straits Tunnel project, and still does not mention any money. So the process of changing this plan into something that is more implementable is happening, but nonetheless, the progress is not finished. So just a few observations that for our discussion later. This plan is very elegant, complex, consistent. It presents very professional planning language, but there's a paradox. It's a master plan for cultural heritage, which does not discuss specific projects, money, and there's very little attention to the professional concerns of heritage people. So cultural heritage is everywhere, but if you look at the bibliography, there are only 17 references on heritage management out of over 300 references, and only 4 peer-reviewed articles in the whole thing. So really, it's not engaging with the conservation literature so much as the planning literature. And this is, I think, a byproduct of participation. So if we understand management as addressing attention, what this plan does is not manage cultural heritage, but it manages relationships between bureaucracies. Not that that is a bad thing, especially in the Turkish context, but it's not what you might expect from reading a cultural heritage plan. And if you look at who participated in the creation of this plan, you have primarily people from governments and NGOs, although many of these NGOs are chartered entities of the state rather than the very independent institutions you might think of when you hear the word NGO. So the nature of the participation drove the plan. You had planners coming together to make a plan. So of course it reflected their expertise and interests. So really, I think this is a management plan for relationships between bureaucracies more than it is for cultural heritage. Now, we normatively assume sometimes that participatory planning is somehow democratic and involves, everyday people. In this case, this is not true, in that Turkish law prescribes specifically who should participate in creating management plans, and there is no forum legally for public participation. Here is an interesting paradox. Is the participatory process an obstacle to getting things done from a conservation perspective? And this is a great example of using best practices, so-called, in planning and management, but not getting the results, i.e. improving conservation outcomes, that you might expect. So I will stop there, and hopefully we can discuss these issues further on.
Great, Dan. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. You broke the ice with this interesting view on Turkey. Now, Jane will talk about Italy. She is not Italian, but she has been here a lot, doing very interesting kind of stuff. You should turn on your microphone, Jane.
Okay, thank you, Professor Zan. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Indeed, Luca Zan is right. This year I celebrate more of my life in Italy than in the UK. So yes, it's a big moment. Let me see if my slides are going forward. Yes. Okay, I'm going to offer a quick kind of overview using Italy to a little bit as a departure point to look at the bigger problems going on elsewhere, because it's very much a mirror of problems every country is facing. My rather negative theme is the fact that our approach to heritage is often producing profoundly unsatisfactory outcomes, and particularly in the spheres of equity, transparency, well-being, the list goes on. And of course, Italy, as I said, is a great place to learn from, precisely because possibly as a huge mecca for tourism, it's stumbled. It's one of the first countries to really stumble in front of the challenges of globalization, mass tourism, and so on. And you'll all be familiar with the challenges of Venice and the issues it raises about whose heritage is it and who benefits from this desire we have to put special places on a public stage. Why are we doing it? What are the benefits? It's not just an Italian problem. This example from China reminds us also that so often our model of promotion and celebration of our shared assets often produces situations where the possibility to enjoy them is completely eliminated by the attempt to enjoy them. And who can appreciate the solitude and remoteness and drama of all of China in these kind of conditions? I'm going to take you to southern Italy, somewhere I've been working this year for 20 years in a public-private partnership. Herculaneum is a lovely case to illustrate possibly the most classic mistake of heritage management in the last 50, 70 years. And it's that kind of desire to protect it, that the community that works around heritage, the desire to protect it produces the opposite. This is a photo only 2-3 years ago. This is the photo of what a paying visitor would see, a beautiful ancient Roman seafront with the volcano that buried the ancient town in the distance with snow on it, Vesuvius. And here is a photo of what the local community were looking at. This is changing right now thanks to an urban regeneration project, but look at their view of World Heritage. I don't know if the resolution's good enough, but there's Ischia in the distance. This is the Gulf of Naples, and this is the local community view of their World Heritage. And this is the best view, because the view for most of the local residential area is this, which we've fondly over the years come to call the Berlin Wall. So when a heritage system, its mechanisms are actually putting up barriers and closing in heritage from the rest of society, something's going deeply wrong. But Italy is also a great playground in which to explore the challenges we're meeting by calling more and more things heritage. The lemon growing traditions of the Amalfi Coast reflect problems in many complex, large heritage sites, cultural landscapes, where we celebrate the interaction of humankind, of communities with the natural environment. And of course, what we're celebrating in Amalfi is essentially generations of families being prepared to do this back-breaking work of growing lemons in a crazy geological mountainous setting and getting them down to the boats and selling them. And so what does that mean in the 21st century? Because it means our outstanding universal value includes the gentleman on the left growing the lemons. Do we have sophisticated approaches which cope with the idea that our heritage values are totally intertwined with those community activities and traditions? I would say we don't. And Amalfi, like many cultural landscapes, is facing the challenges of abandonment of the land, of depopulation in favor of tourism and other easy earners rather than growing lemons. And again, it's not just an Italian problem. Mont Saint-Michel, France, since its inscription, we've only got worse at protecting this idea that a community many centuries ago decided to occupy a rock in the middle of the sea near France and make a living off the sea's resources and make this a community. And our response gets worse. Not only have we stimulated through excessive tourism depopulation, but our response is Macron only a couple of years ago announced that the solution is to reduce the classic municipality model. This is a real town, it should have a municipality, and introduce a heritage foundation. It seems to be missing the whole point that the whole identity of this place is a living community, and the people matter more, obviously, than the souvenirs. And of course, I go to my own home country, the capital city, London, for the ultimate paradox. The city of free museums, it's one World Heritage Site. It costs over 30 euros to get in. I mean, we've become ridiculous. We put something on such a stage that it becomes inaccessible. And the management model is completely isolated from all other heritage management in London. Something kind of weird is going on. Now, I'll come back to Italy swiftly. This is the huge step forward of 2017. Tourism was under the Ministry of Culture for a period. And there was a really noble effort to say, let's seize the day and manage this business of tourism better and improve our approach, up our game. And it really is a noble piece of work pushed forward by Francesco Palumbo. The difficulty is, and this is a huge, broader problem of tourism in the cultural sector, is the tendency to get lost in tourism being the final aim. And notwithstanding that this document made a huge effort to say tourism should benefit local communities, it still makes some grave errors. And it's basically, the first one for me is it says that the whole center of the strategy is the tourist. And that all we're doing, the ultimate objective of our actions, is to make the tourist happy. Now, at the same time, it's kind of remembering that we need sustainable development benefits. So we're getting our tourists to cultural heritage destinations to make them happy. No, it should be the local communities, the well-being of local stakeholders that are our ultimate objective from tourism strategies. And this becomes very poignant on page 27 of the strategy, where it happily shows off that Italy is cutting edge for health, heritage and culture in this, every year there's this country brand index. Italy's up there at the top for heritage and culture. It's up there at the top for tourism, but where are we for quality of life? And where is that conversation? And that really goes to the heart of the fact that we're not really looking out of our silos, out of our little bubbles, and trying to create cross-sectorial, mutually reciprocal excellence. And the heritage sector is particularly guilty because we love sitting in our own little self-referential bubble. And of course, all this is happening while we have the concept of heritage overtaking us. This is a great slide from Rem Koolhaas, which really sums up the fact that, you know, by the end of today, my computer will be a piece of heritage. It's a non-stopping escalation that pretty much everything around us is becoming heritage. This is true for the natural sector. Protected areas, and rightly so, given the crisis on the planet, are everywhere. And this is in a reality where, of course, the speed of change in society and our ability to follow it means the kind of number of threats are also exploding, as is our understanding of them. And just at the same time as we sort of gently try and destroy the natural environment and more species, we're kind of creating an absurdity. And so I'd list quickly, and taking Italy as a kind of mirror of the rest of the world, the things that we've really got to get over some big mistakes that are right at the heart of our heritage institutions agendas. One is the mistake of seeing tourism automatically as a good thing. It's not necessarily good for heritage. Secondly, seeing it as an end in itself. Big mistake. Tourism should be a means to achieve something good for several multiple stakeholders. The other mistake I see is copy and paste, unintelligent copying of business model sectors, corporate models, without a proper understanding of the difference when you're looking after things that belong to everybody. It's a very different agenda. And so maybe you're branding your institution, but you can't brand something that belongs to everybody. It's a very different concept. So I think there's a real lack in a lot of the master's courses, lecturing, teaching, research going on. There's a real lack of understanding that you can't copy and paste from the private sector, and nor can you copy and paste from all the culture sector, because a lot of our culture sector has become corporate. Think of a lot of US museums. The other thing, and Herculaneum and my Berlin Wall are the examples, when using the concept of making it public becomes a means to fence it in and actually create exclusiveness. And I think we can quite honestly say amongst us that that's been the trend, not just in Italy, but in many countries with a lot of classical archaeology, where the struggle to cope in terms of human resources, adequate institutional frameworks, the easiest way to defend it is to close it in. And of course, a lot of our problems come from the fact that our institutions and our training as archaeologists, architects, our historians, too few of us are economists, sociologists, and so on. Our training kind of assumes heritage is a thing you can put a fence around. It is separate from the rest, which is obviously incredibly problematic and untrue. And the other trend we have, and I echo some of the comments Daniel was making, is that this process whereby the elements that are public actually create a mechanism where the decision making is actually for a few, even though many might be consulted. The final power mechanisms remain at the heart of the public, i.e. exclusive mechanisms. And of course, this whole journey of trying to kind of work in hostile circumstances with inadequate institutional frameworks, maybe shortages of resources, problematic legal frameworks, creates a defensive culture. In the face of the speed of change, our sector has become defensive and almost military-like. And conservation has become a kind of battle, a kind of heroic martyrdom. We'll do whatever it takes to defend your local church or whatever it is, rather than a more holistic understanding of our mandate. This means that most of us, I would say pretty much most of us, are working with institutions that were invented with this idea of heritage that you can define with a line around it. And there was probably a single institution that could kind of solve all its problems. And of course, what we're all dealing with is a lot more complex. And not only we are in the 21st century expecting heritage to benefit all of us, we're not just protecting it for the sake of it. So it's a much more complex challenge. And it means those of us dealing with management, research management, modeled management, improvements on the ground today, the essence of our challenge is looking at all those realities of factors, but instead of automatically calling them threats, which has been the culture of nearly all our literature for the last 70 years, recognize that our task is to stop defending ourselves from threats, but to work with others to turn threats into opportunities. That is, I would say, is the challenge of our management agenda today, and what our institutions are truly failing to see. And I go back to Italy, sorry, to say, I'm going to close with a few kind of comments on what's the way out of this kind of cul-de-sac. And I don't have all the answers, but I certainly have some enthusiastic passions on the topic. Clearly, the way we talk about our institutions is deeply problematic and inadequate in itself. This is the organogram at the beginning of the Italian reform, sorry, I don't know why I said that with an Italian accent. This is the beginning of the Italian reform, and this is the updated version. Now we have a trendy Minister of Culture. It's still not talking to us about the way by which this organization is going to work with others, with other sectors, with other partners, and create dynamism. We're kind of not very good at creating communication tools that talk about that. It goes further, the kind of attempts, the really noble and in many ways successful reforms of the last few years, since 2016 onwards, have created huge leaps forwards in many areas. For the first time, we've been recruiting highly skilled human resources. There's been a whole decentralization of decision-making near the problems with the autonomous institutes. So a lot of improvements. But there's a basic thread running through all the reform that I've contested from day one. And it's this slight mistake, I think, of copying and pasting a little bit too directly the kind of American museum model, which is the idea that we're still in that little single institution that Luca mentioned, that is somehow solving all the problems, and it's delivering services. And our agenda is customer satisfaction. Looking after something that belongs to everybody, there's no customer. It's a much broader and complex mandate. So I think at the heart of this reform, there's a museum with walls and a collection. It never deals adequately with cultural heritage places in the open air, with decay, historic urban centres with zillions of stakeholders like Daniel mentioned. So it's kind of failing. It's kind of thinking that a museum business model can somehow work for everybody. And this goes right through the reform. And it goes right into how today, what could be an incredible leap forward. Finally, there's an objective-based management mentality in our ministry for the first time in decades, but it's making this same mistake. It's framing it on a very narrow view of what heritage is, and it's framing it on the idea that the one institution does everything. So the parameters on which success is currently being defined for our new autonomous institutes, our regional museum networks, is missing fundamental concepts like how much are you managing to conserve? Not how much money you spend, but how well are you spending it? Who are you partnering with and with what results? What's the before and after? And what's gravest is while there is transparency about the criteria for success, no information is shared at the end of the process. So we, the citizens, whose taxes are being spent or partnership volunteer work are being utilized, we don't get to see the health of our machine, of our management machine. And that's bad for the people involved in the first place because they deserve visibility if they're successful. And above all, another parameter missing is this review process that establishes if, I don't know, the Uffizi or the regional museum network for Campania is being managed well, it evaluates the success of the director. It's the idea that this, just like an American museum, it's the director that's going to make the difference. It doesn't evaluate the success of the management system in its more elaborate nuances. So the person filling in these forms cannot actually comment on the fact that, yes, they have achieved 72 events, they have done great anti-corruption regulations and very transparent about all the tendering, but they don't get to talk about the most crucial, possibly one of the most crucial problems of the entire system, is that the average age of the public officer is 57 years old in 2021. And that's after a phenomenal, heroic public recruitment campaign. That public recruitment campaign set such high standards of qualifications that, of course, all those frustrated people who hadn't got a job for the last 20 years applied. And the new young staff are generally in their 40s. And sometimes even in their 50s. So the review process, I don't want to sound negative because it's an incredible leap forward, but it's failing to let the real issues emerge. So what I'm saying is we're really
Jane,
not, yeah?
Yeah, we are 15 minutes. So.
Oh my God, sorry. I've got the three conclusions, Luca.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks.
Sorry
We've really got a changing mandate. And the way I see it is if what we're doing is different, it's all about attracting support. We have to start talking about heritage in a more sophisticated way. We need to learn from the nature people. They don't just list species, they look at ecosystems, they map into connections. And it's a bit what cultural mapping points towards. You start talking about heritage as a quality and as a much more complex thing. No more inventories. Second recommendation, we need to start understanding where people and communities figure in governance better. We've been talking about engagement for years. This is the 1990s. People have done great analysis. We're still not doing it well. We still draw these organigrams. Even the manuals at UNESCO, I wrote this one with colleagues, that we're still failing to talk about it in a sophisticated way. We just distribute where organizations hang out. IUCN just as bad. We begin to see attempts to talk about working together. This is a transboundary site for the frontiers of the Roman Empire. But maybe we have to go to places like Konza in Ethiopia, where they're much more sophisticated in talking about inter-community relations and responsibilities. Can we learn from them? And is it there that we'll start talking better about how to do things with this motto of not for us, without us? And I echo Daniel's words about the management planning process in Istanbul, because if people talk about Hadrian's Wall as best practice, its interest value is they got everything completely wrong, and we need to learn from their mistakes. 712 farmers were ignored in the first round of management planning. And the interest value of Hadrian's Wall is that ability to recognize that the management system is very complex. It's not one entity, it's zillions of stakeholders working together. And when you apply our management system analysis from the 2013 manual, this very basic 9-component system, to Hadrian's Wall, 1990s, and you fill out the boxes and you see what 20 years of management planning did, you start to see the level of interconnected evaluations we should be doing in a review process. Last but not least, the classic sustainable development stuff we're talking about in our title. There's been a wake-up call. Even outstanding universal value can't stand up if you don't sort out sustainable development. And there's been a policy, it's not translating to work on the ground properly, but there's a greater recognition that if we don't align ourselves with other sectors, we'll become victims of it. So people are beginning to understand that this stuff has to be on our agenda. We need to talk about it in a more sophisticated way. This is the Stockholm Research Institute way of talking about the 2030 goals, which I find very much more beneficial. And a lot of people out there are doing it. Urban planning in the US, the UK's National Trust triple bottom line tool. So basically I finish, it's my last slide, Luca. We're looking at a massive paradigm change where instead of regulating and deciding, we're turning this pyramid on its head, and our institutions and us as practitioners are at the services of communities and networks. And I think that's what the Italian system has to still get right, as do pretty much most countries in the world. Thank you. And this is my last happy slide, which is a good model in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and sorry to press you.
No, I'm sorry. I'm always optimistic.
Yeah. That's now the screen is Maria Luciani.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Luca, and everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I will continue the thread that my colleagues already started, and by focusing on an aspect that has been a little bit hinted at also by Daniel's presentation at the beginning, which is the aspect of financial resources and the importance of understanding and reconstructing the underlying business models, the internal economy of how heritage sites, World Heritage Sites work, and how they, in order to understand how they really work, in fact. So I will make a premise just to introduce myself and also maybe to explain a little bit my angle and my take on that. I am a management scholar with an interest for cultural heritage since forever in my study and research career. And this might explain the view that I have. I look at World Heritage Sites specifically as organizations in the first place. Certainly very complex organizations. So they are clearly, and we saw also from the presentations before, they are necessarily complex organizational arrangements where multiple and diverse actors, institutions, policymakers, processes, resources, and interests converge and insist on the same site, sometimes coexisting, sometimes actually clashing, but in any case in a complex way. And this complexity calls for administration, needs to be orchestrated or administered and coordinated somehow, in a way it needs to be managed somehow. And this is exactly the fact of the issue of how these complex organizations manage to work, how they manage to sustain themselves and continue when they do their existence is something that has always fascinated me, to try to understand and dig into this complexity of their management. Hence, this interest for site management when we talk about World Heritage Sites. I have to notice that in the past few years, maybe decades, there has been a growing attention, a growing interest for site management issues among heritage scholars, which is something to be very much welcomed with pleasure. And according to my view on that, I think that the main topics that compose the view of site management among heritage scholars are actually many topics that we are also witnessing in the presentations during these very nice sessions in this global forum in this past week. For example, one that we also just saw with Jane's presentation, the issue of inclusion of local communities and diverse views as an inherent element of managing World Heritage Sites. More than that, and also we've just seen it also with Jane's presentation and Dan's presentation as well, the issue of the coordination of a major institutional complexity, multiple administrative layers, multiple and different jurisdictions, different political agendas coming with that. And another topic that has been, of course, more and more central to the discourse on site management among heritage scholars is the centrality of management plans, sometimes even with very sophisticated tools and terminology, as we saw, for example, with the Istanbul case, that not always matched then the actual reality in terms of implementation, as we also saw. And then more than the fact that site management is seen more and more as a tool also for local development of the broader area in general. I think this is very important. This is a nice notion emerging of management for sites and heritage sites among heritage scholars that, as Luca was saying at the beginning, is way less trivial and way less reductive than most of mainstream views on management that sometimes reduce management to just fundraising and communication and audience development and the like. So this is good, this is nice, this is interesting, there's a lot to learn from that. But at the same time, I also sense that there is at least one blind spot, at least one element that is always, still remains at the margins of this conversation, which is the underlying architecture and the dynamics of the financial resources. So the internal economy of these sites. In a way, understanding that and trying to reconstruct that means reconstructing their underlying business model that actually eventually explains how these organizations work or do not work, how to manage to sustain themselves, whether they enable the conditions for their sustained existence as a site. And that's exactly what interests me. So in order to illustrate that, I will draw on a case study of a past research of ours that I conducted with Luca Zan many years ago. So this is not a novel evidence, pieces of evidence, but I will draw on that as an illustrative way to try to depict what I mean by reconstructing the underlying internal economy of a site in order to understand how it works really. The case is the historical sanctuary of Machu Picchu in Peru, and this was part of a major field research that we conducted in 2008, where our empirical research question was very broad, very simple, but complex to be answered to, and which was the one of understanding how the historical center of Machu Picchu was actually managed. And part of that, part of the answer was reconstructed by an analysis and a reconstruction empirically of its underlying internal economy. So just a couple of words to understand what we're talking about. We need to frame it in the context. Peru, so this is part of the Peruvian administration way, and in those years, Peru was going through a process of modernization of the state towards more transparency of public action and regulation of national public investment systems and decentralization closer to where the needs are, also in the public sector. What are we talking about? When we talk about Machu Picchu, we often think about the world famous Inca city, the citadel, but it's important to understand that that's just one spot in a network of almost 200 archaeological sites divided in 4 macro regions: mountains, Inca Trail, Sacred Valley, and Sacred River. And I focus on the notion of, and it's a large area, 32,000 hectares with a perimeter of 116 kilometers, just to understand the width of what we're talking about. And I'm insisting on the sacred meaning because this site has a sacred meaning that is rooted in its natural dimension. So it has cultural and natural value together, as recognized by UNESCO in 1983. It's a case of institutional fragmentations and many others that we also heard of, with different jurisdictions, different ministry system there, different interests between preservation and exploitation and tourism exploitation, with different local indigenous rationalities and also global agendas thereon. So this was just to give the picture of what we're talking about. Here, to reconstruct its internal economy, we focus on one entity, which is INS Cusco, the regional branch of the institutional, the National Institution for Culture, so an emanation of the Ministry of Education back then, that we should understand as part of this decentralization wave that we saw before. So since 2003, INS Cusco was entrusted with the direct management of the whole historical sanctuary of Machu Picchu. and it managed all the different sites and site museums, and also collaborated with the local municipalities of the Sacred Valley to the management also of the many small historical centers and sites in the whole territory. So what did we do? I'm here showing our endpoint, actually, that our reconstruction of the main income figures and expenditure figures and economic results of INS Cusco for what concerns the historical center of Machu Picchu, that we meticulously reconstructed for many documents that we collected from the administrative offices and planning and budget offices of INS Cusco. And this is the picture that we reconstructed over the years that we were considering back then. Already we can see many things. So this was not a data that was given, but it was the end point of our reconstruction. And already we can see many things because numbers can tell a lot. Already we can see here that in terms of income, all of the income is coming from actually the ticketing from the Inca city, the Inca Trail, and then all the many other 200 sites that we saw. Part of this income, part of these resources are transferred to the local municipality of Aguascalientes, Machu Picchu Pueblo, constructed for actually tourism exploitation and private interest, together with the growth of tourism in Machu Picchu. And part of those income, of those resources, are also transferred to support and fund other major regional or national cultural heritage projects, as we saw here. Here we can see the trends of this income, and then the costs, the different expenditure that is divided into administrative expenditures, current costs for maintenance works, and investment projects. And then the results that even after the transfers is actually positive results over these years. Here, the money is expressed in local currency. So just to focus on 2007, here we have, so all years we have a surplus, a profit. So it's a profitable entity overall, and it's continuously so, and this amounts for, like today would be something around 5,000 euros of profit. So a few thousand euros of profits every year. These are some first general considerations. Then of course, numbers can be unpacked further. I will not go into all of the details, but I will just draw your attention on some other elements, some other things that number can tell us about. So the historical center of Machu Picchu, looking at the income structure, is essentially a fully self-funded institution. There are only minimal transfers through national budgeting procedure. It generates resources from earned income from tickets that cover all of the expenditures. They support the municipality, and they also fund other relevant projects. If we look at that, especially with a focus on 2007, it's the Inca city and the Inca Trail together, they account for 88% of the total income. All the rest of the heritage sites that are managed by INS Cusco, they generate a minimal income, but at the same time, they benefit from all the resources generated by the Inca city and the Inca Trail, so to cover all of these costs. In terms of dynamics, we see a sustained growth in income figures. 2007 income is more than twice the value in 2002. And this is explained by a little bit inflation, but a lot by the explosion in visitor numbers that we also reconstructed, and also the rise of the ticket price to enter the Inca city and the Inca Trail. Similar considerations or different considerations can be conducted also if we unpack the expenditures figures. What can we say here? Just a few elements to highlight. Of 2007 total expenditures, half of them are for maintenance, so current activities, 10% for administration, and almost 40% for investment projects. But here it's important to note one thing, that talking with the people, interviewing the people there, it emerged that conservation and excavation costs are all accounted as capital investments as part of investment projects and not as current costs. This provides a distorted representation of the actual current costs and therefore also on the economic value that is created by this organization. But here we reported them here as part of the cost because indeed they are part of the conservation and excavation costs that constitute a big portion of the activity of to run these heritage sites. Then 60% of the expenditures are characterized by personnel costs, 40% by goods and services, which is not surprising. These are organizations essentially run by people, as in, but it's interesting to note, looking at the further breakdown of the personnel cost, that most of it is on contract, temporary staff. And just a little percentage is for full-time employees, which unveils a picture of fragility of this underlying business model, precariousness in a way. In terms of dynamics, we see that all costs are also expanded over time in this time frame, but especially looks like the rate growth in administrative and operating expenditures is higher than the growth in investments. Again, talking with the people there, we understood that investment projects have also grown, but they were slowed down in a way by the National Investment Procedure bureaucracy that wants for transparency issues to review all projects proposal for expenditures, to control public expenditures in a way. So the whole picture together, what can we say about that? What can we say about the underlying internal economy of this case and conditions for autonomy and sustainability? It's an almost totally self-funded entity, clearly, which can use resources from visitors and only from visitors to cover everything, all expenditures, running costs, labor, and investment projects, which is very peculiar. It's a big case of internal cross-subsidizing because we see that there are two highly profitable sites, the Inca City and the Inca Trail, that actually fund everything else, the entire preservation, conservation, and operation of the whole region. It's a case of a fast and perhaps in part unforeseen growth in terms of all figures, income, costs, and also numbers of visitors, only partly controlled for. So overall, it's a very peculiar case of a lucrative business model de facto for all parties involved, for INSS Cusco, for all the other policymakers there, the local administration, all the private stakeholders in the regions, and so on. So definitely here, it's a case of where there are strong conditions for sustained existence in terms of financial resources, and certainly of autonomy, a big particular case of autonomy in heritage sites. But this analysis also raises further question about actual other conditions for cultural sustainability. Is it something that is sustainable in the long run with this high pressure on tourism and with this particular system of two big sites with over-tourism that actually feed the rest, that are probably well less visited and known. So, as I said, this was just a snapshot, an example of a reconstruction of the internal economy and what we mean by reconstructing the internal economy or unearthing the underlying business model of a heritage site. In general, we can conclude that numbers tell a lot. Here I just said a little. And that financial performance is not and should not be at all the driver for decision-making in heritage sites, but yet a focus on financial resources is of extreme importance. It's the old boring back office if you want, but in the end, it's a real ground to all the universal cultural value that is otherwise not realized if there is no underlying ground to that. It helps understanding how these complex organizations actually work and whether they sustain themselves or not, or it unveils potential future consequences, intended or unintended one. It makes explicit some hidden assumptions or potentially unintended outcomes also. So in the end, the sustained existence of a site ultimately depends on the availability of adequate financial resources, or at least on the control on them and on their dynamics in relation to the activities that are run or that are envisaged in the plans. A reflection on the internal economy of a site, I really think that should be present in any discourse about site management and planning, and cannot be just marginalized or taken for granted or tackled in some future moments that never come. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. Just a couple of comments. I mean, before I forget, as a coordinator of the session, I mean, it's funny. I mean, we are obsessed by organizations that are running out of money, that are lacking resources. And when you get a situation like that, having resources, being a profitable, one of the most profitable non-profit organizations could be even more dangerous than in the Pompeii case of lacking funding. And the other thing that just to underline, because of the language, I mean, you know, when Maria was talking about the lacking of understanding of the internal economy, and one of the distinctions that is basic, crucial for any of us as economist or a management expert is the distinction between what we call investment decision or running decisions. One thing is when you set up a new museum or you refurbish the site, and here is where the attention is normally in most of the community of experts. And then when you open the museum, when you open the archaeological sites, everything, you realize there's no budgeting for current cost, for current situation, because all the political process, the egos of politicians and professional is on the first phase of setting up, which is a very basic distinction about a continuous goal, something we discovered 20 years ago, and we are continuously reselling because it's so difficult to buy this idea by the expert. So, okay, so now I'm giving the floor to myself, and I'm trying to behave well and keep within the 15 minutes, I would say. So I'm talking about China, if I'm able to find the right slide. Yes, and I should share the screen. Can you see it? Can you see it? Someone can say yes?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. So basically talking about discourse in China, particularly based on this huge project of development of what they call Daiji, something like that. And Chinese do not understand my pronunciation, which is this great archaeological sites. And that was a policy that was developing the 11th and 12th 5 years plan with the idea of building, rebuilding, reopening the sites. This huge, very important, most important archaeological sites in the history of China. And that was what I'm trying to focus on is the link between intention and realized policy through the mergers of unintended consequences. These are words that are crucial in our vocabularies as management experts. So interesting enough, the Chinese provides an example, one of the few examples of policy that someone tried to monitor years after. So in 2014, 15, 14, I guess, they were trying to say, okay, we had 2 5 years plan on this policy. What the hell is the outcomes? What have we achieved so far? Which is quite unusual. And when we talk about policy, nobody really cares about monitoring years after what would happen. So, and there is this the context of this trend of internationalization of heritage practice, which should be taken with care, handled with care. I mean, UNESCO itself has become part of the process of, I would say, superficial isomorphism, where things seem to become similar in many contexts, which is completely sure about in terms of the actual meanings of this commonalities in practice. And that policy on great archaeological site was dense with kind of identity tunes, and I would say national tune. Identity, it really depends who's speaking about identity. When it's the government is one thing, if it's community, there's another thing. So that is really more than stakeholders, I would say the stakeholders. So in any case, there is just policy bias. And let me show talking about this research is crazy. These are 150 sites that have been defined over years of the 2 plans in terms of sites that are crucial to represent the history of development of China over millennia. I'm not going to comment on each of them into details, but actually I'm not going to to focus that much on the details of this research and the outcomes, just in very instrumental ways to open the discussion on our topics here. So one of the interesting things from the beginning, there was a focus on conservation. Then they invented a term which is so difficult to translate, and it's not really very meaningful even when you translate it in the end, which is from conservation to conservational interpretation, which I spent weeks trying to understand and talk and discuss with my friends. But so in a sense, it's a kind of conservation which is also taking into account the user, the visitor, the tourist, I would say. And yeah, that was a huge research. That was 21 years man full-time equivalent. It was incredible in terms of the amount of work we put as a team and the involvement of people. And that's telling. I mean, this kind of research, doing management research, is incredible time consuming. That is why nobody really does it, basically, because it's so time consuming and also difficult, complicated. You have to be in the field and you have to be there. Just a few aspects I would like to sum up here. Of course, I mean, I was looking back the book we published a couple of years ago. It was so dense, so difficult to me myself to sum up. So just a few things in terms of quantitative achievement. I mean, this focus, this policy, this national, if not nationalistic tune, Chinese and Chineseness and Chinese civilization, was focusing on 155 great archaeological sites with a lot of paperwork done. In the end, 20 of them done a lot, got a lot of money, done a lot of work, 50 of them done something, not that much, and 80 of them done nothing over the 2-5 years plan span. So that's interesting in itself in terms of how easy it's talking, how difficult is getting things done, as we say as a management. Machu slogan. This is another interesting result in terms of the outcomes, qualitatively speaking, in terms of, you know, there is an issue of heritage protection in itself in the upper part of the triangle. There is an issue of opening sites to the visitors, and sometimes the two things are completely unconnected. You can have places that are very sexy for tourists, but not relevant for heritage, and vice versa. Sites that are particularly interesting for the historian, for the expert, that has nothing to tell us in terms of the wow effect, particularly when you deal with remains that were built of earth and wood, and 2,000 or 3,000 years later are very, very difficult to understand, to interpret. So when you see that the small mountain, small hill, that was the pagoda, which is, so the visitor will not necessarily be interested, and maybe you should be very careful whether you should invest money to get a visitor there with such difficulties. Or on the other part, the last triangle, this is where things most of the time start in China in terms of other uses of land, in terms of farming, in terms of agriculture, that were in a sense over years damaging or putting sites at risk. But the things that is interesting, I mean, a policy of conservation, in a sense, would try to move each individual site from initial position toward the upper vertex of the triangle, toward the heritage preservation. And that happened in a couple of cases from a different point of view. What is interesting, most of the time, what is the result of this policy in those few cases where it had an impact, is more kind of making them kind of tourist opportunities, or Disneyland kind of sites, as I will show you in a short while. I mean, there are so many things and so many cases that can be referred to, and I will look at quickly one in the next slide. There is, when you have this huge policy involving 155 sites, involving so much of history, interest in terms of what you're talking about, what is really interesting, how management was completely missing from this perspective. And management was missing, at least in terms of three very important aspects. One is the issue of land. I mean, that's a long story to explain, but you know, in different countries, different kind of legal regime and different laws, who is the owner of the land itself, and how this huge process of conservation have implication in terms of land acquisitions, that you have to buy, and you have to buy from the market, and this is something that was completely lost, completely forgotten, overlooked in the law, and that is where most of the sites found many serious issues, because the land acquisition were not budget, or in any case, there was not any kind of attention from a legal point of view or kind of legal measure to support the policy. The issue of compensation, you know, most of the time, the biggest item was simply to compensate people. One of the richest person in the state organization we were working was one of the chauffeurs, the drivers. And he got a lot of money to move from the center. And who spent one single week in China in heritage field knows how many millions of people have been moved in the last 100, I would say 10 years or 20 years. Financing, once again, the huge policy is providing a lot of money for setting up, not a single penny for budgeting current operations once you open the site. So you have wonderful new sites, kind of cathedrals or deserts, as we call it in Italy. Once you open them, you don't have money to run them, you don't have money for people, you don't have money to clean them, and you have no tourists at all. So, and organizations in terms of decision making, in terms of assessment, there is one wonderful case, which is there was a case that was already studied by Tim Williams from UCL, and he was suggesting on this site to have a very minor kind of investment, to just propose a kind of very professional kind of intervention, a better preservation, a bit of research, just kind of visitor center or improving a bit. And they simply forgot this recommendation. So and they were coming out with a huge investment on a new building, kind of Bilbao, with this Chinese star architects that are spending a lot of money. What the incentive mechanism is, the more you spend, the more you get. So, and this is just trying to, this is how it was, that was Loyang at Tiantan. That was how it was in 2011 when I visited it first time. This is the replica of the remain. I mean, this is one of the tradition of Chinese to simply cover and make a replica of what they, that was the base of the pagoda. And this is the new interior, very fancy, and this is that is, can you understand the difference? That is how it was, and this is how it is. And I still remember the director of our research, which was also the secretary of the Communist Party, that was almost crying and said, "This is not the policy we were wishing to establish." So welcome to the club. This is management. One of the things, and I'm going to conclude, one of the most important things that I learned in the last 40 years in the field is that strategy get never realized as intended. And policy is the same, and we have this obsession to you think something, you make your strategy, and you do it. You define your mission, you do things, and things are there. No, this is not true. Intention, most of the time, get lost nowhere. Sometimes you have realized strategies that are really in line with what you thought, but that is more the exception of the rule. Most of the time, there are emergent things that make your strategy what it is. They're kind of accident. So if you are aware of this aspect, I think you can reduce the risk of what's going on in a complex social action. I mean, there are unanticipated consequences by definition. As a management expert, as a planner, I know that I will fail to plan. It's just an attention. I mean, and this is in general. I mean, that unanticipated consequences will be there, and particularly there are some unanticipated consequences that are the impact of the lack of management lenses. And here, this interpretation of this policy of DAIJ in terms of very nationalistic kind of policy in terms of identity building, you can make direct propaganda to the general public, perhaps. You can make everything you want, but the problem is that you have to implement your strategy or your policy through administration. And when you implement through administration, you implement something which has their own inertia. You develop professionalism. Architects departments were closed down in the Cultural Revolution. Then you reopen, you legitimize. Then there are processes that are complicated. People feel part of the invisible college or the international community of archaeologists, and not necessarily are really acting as you were assuming that we'll see. You will have an impact in terms of structuring salvage excavation that will have a completely more anarchist, I would say pluralist attitude in discovering history and remains than any deliberate top-down policy. And also in terms of more strictly administrative process of decentralization of resources, people, and money. So I'm not trying here to explain what the research was, but the kind of phenomena that was involved and how missing management lenses will simply increase the risk of inconsistency and getting aware and unsustainability. Taking management seriously into account means accepting the idea of bounded rationality. I mean, bounded rationality is a notion that is so trivial if you're not an economist. Rationality is bounded. Our calculative practice is limited. So let's forget the two linear models of rational choice and think and analyze how processes take place. And this is much more useful perspective also, even in practical terms, more than being simply an interesting research perspective. So, and that's it. And I will take off my presentation. So we talk about very different things, but in a way, something that is consistent to some extent. And I don't know how we want, I mean, there is a chat. There is one question. Shall I read the question or shall I call for, the question is by Amal Nazir. What is the right step, briefly, that should be undertaken to renew the administrative structure of heritage institution? And how to move from a conventional management to a more inclusive approach? Who wants to? There are two very different questions in a sense. I can answer on the first one. There is no right ways. There's no easy ways. You have to understand the context. And what works in Pompeii doesn't work in Herculaneum. What does not work here does not work there. They are not easy, solutions. So something has to be tailored in depth. So that's why our research is so time consuming. We have to be there, we have to understand in detail, practice, institutional context. I gave an answer to the first part. I don't know if someone wants to answer to the second part on a more inclusive approach.
I could try.
Okay.
I mean, I think again, the answer is it depends. I mean, in the case of the Istanbul management plan, it was very inclusive, but who was included? Members of public administrations. Now, the question, if I think this is I think we have to think first, who are we trying to include and why? There is a idealistic notion that heritage management should always be democratic and involve the people and reflect popular desires and wishes. In practice, many public administrations or many legal systems have a hard time actually doing that. And so the question is, who do you want to include in what sorts of decisions and why? And that's, again, I know that's not really an answer to the question, but I think the first thing to do is to frame what are your goals, and also to understand in the administrative and institutional context, what is possible.
Yes, it was Jan, you want to answer to? Okay, Daniel, and then.
Yeah. I think, I mean, the question goes to the heart of what a lot of national systems are going through right now. Many because they're trying to domesticate the World Heritage Convention or the Faro Convention in Europe. So they're trying to understand how they can become, as Daniel put it, more democratic. And that there is no right answer. And obviously it also depends profoundly on what heritage typologies your heritage place is bringing together, because obviously the difference between a historic urban center and an archaeological area or a seascape, coastal cultural landscape, they're so diverse. It's the real heart of the matter. And you see very extreme approaches. You'll get some countries that, for example, after the civil war in the Balkans, countries like Croatia rewriting their constitution, and immediately, at the top level, changing the thinking to being more values-based, more participatory. In other countries, it's happening from the bottom up, or happening in compartments. For example, in Italy, the fact that the reforms allowed some areas to accelerate in this area, others less. So it's very mixed. But it's fair to say that this question captures what's happening generally, what everybody's struggling with.
Just one thing in addition, and then I give the floor to Daniela. There's one thing that I think we should acknowledge, which is the linguistic domination and I would say cultural imperialism of American institutions and journals. So all the journals we are writing on are controlled by American institutions. They don't have even a Ministry of Culture. They don't know what a public good is. So I was talking with Chinese students who were talking about profit and non-profit. Jesus Christ, you have a state. You have a communist party before the non-profit. So this is a very dangerous situation of, that we pay in the sector with the linguistic and cultural domination of the exception to the rule, where the US is more the exception to the rule. I'm sorry to get furious on that and give the floor to Daniele.
Yes, I found the presentation very, very interesting. However, I would like to make an observation almost to all of you. Is if we talk of heritage entities, I think that we have to consider that not only the central ministerial entities are managing heritage, not only the sectorial entities that deals with culture or tourism are managing heritage, but there are a lot of other stakeholders that may be involved and that may have a crucial role. I would like to make two examples, if possible, very briefly. Concerning Istanbul, it happened to me to work years ago on Istanbul municipality of a YUP that now has managed to have their historic center in the tentative list. Well, the municipality of Ayup was preparing a management plan and conservation plan with the intention to protect the historic core and to improve the access to the main square with an important religious monument or whatever. At the same time, the metropolitan government was designing some infrastructure that would have destroyed the square that the municipality was trying to regenerate and to rehabilitate and so on. And so there was an evident contradiction. I don't know what happened in the end. I suppose that the projects of the metropolitan government have been stopped or at least have been revised so to have a less effect, let's say, on the area. But anyway, it was clear that there was a very strong conflict, between the two levels of government. Another case I would make is the Italian one. I congratulated with Jane Thompson for the very brilliant presentation. However, I would like to remember that in Italy, the regions and the municipalities have a very, very important role in heritage management. I mean, sorry if I talk of historic center, but unfortunately I am an architect, urban planner, and historic centers in Italy are protected just in case protected or destroyed. It depends on the cases, mostly by the master plans or the urban plans of the municipalities that are extremely detailed. If our historic cities are more or less well preserved compared to other countries, it depends on the efforts that were carried out in the 70s with very detailed urban plans that study the conservation of historic centers in the framework of the general urban development. And I think that this is one of the few achievements of Italy in the international scene. Now we are completely losing all that with the new plan for resilience and what else? What's the name? Maybe Luca knows better than me. I think that this achievement will be completely lost. However, I will say that
you mean the recovery plan? The recovery plan post-COVID?
The recovery plan, yes, the famous recovery plan. There is I hope these lines have been deleted, which are extremely dangerous, from this point of view, because they will allow to increase the volumes and to do whatever everywhere. So anyway, I think this is very important because the regions, for instance, the region now have the role of protection that used to have the central ministry in Italy. And we cannot overlook the role of this institution also because very often the action of this institution is in conflict with the central ministry priorities, or is in conflict with other, I don't know, with the Ministry of Infrastructure or whatever. So I think that we have to consider that heritage, indeed, the heritage management involved a multiplicity of stakeholders, even institutional stakeholders, that cannot be limited to the central administration or to the, let's say, sectorial administration of culture. On the other hand, it's perfectly true, and I think it's worth to be developed, what you said about the fact that heritage is only considered as an asset for tourism. I remember a minister in the 80s who was talking of giacimenti culturali.
I remember the ministry.
Yeah, exactly. That is that really heritage was like oil, just to you drill and you bring the oil out of the earth.
Yeah, but Daniele, what you say is right, and it's also in line with the question that Derek was making in terms of historical district. So, but I mean that's interesting in two senses. I mean, first, it was, in a sense, to me, it was more kind of a negative power, the power to say no. So when it worked was because it was stopping something.
Yeah.
And when you have to develop in some way, which is the case of Venice, I mean, we could talk
Venice,
for hours.
You know that Venice is a separate world. So
okay.
No, but for instance, if you are talking of urban regeneration projects, this is exactly the case where local government may have a role, and sometimes opposite to the central one. You know, I can tell you because of personal experience in many cases. So. I mean, it's not easy to find, to outline a general model, let's say. But in any case, it is important to consider the fact that there is a multiplicity of actors, a multiplicity of stakeholders when you talk of heritage, and especially when you talk of urban heritage, that cannot be overlooked. That's
absolutely. You have to explain
just
me
an observation.
No, the other part of the question was why you guys always, I mean, urban planner in Italy say urban planning is died. Now, why
it's died? Over? Yes, it's died. Yes, my job is finished.
that should be should be argued and studied.
No. It's true that there is an incredible, how could I say, reaction to the planning of the past year. Now the regulations are very, very loose and very, how could I say, too simple and too stupid. Finished. Okay. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Jane, your hand is on or before?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to respond. Can you hear me? Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Daniel Pini. I mean, absolutely, exactly. My frustration with our ministerial organograms is exactly that inability to put all the other spots on the organogram of all the others, which is why I quite like the frontier of the Roman empires, because they start talking about all the others that are off the, the pyramid.
You would have needed 3 slides.
Exactly. Yeah, we needed more than 10, 15 minutes. But the reason I hated Hadrian's Wall for years, because it was used as this best practice, but it's absolutely fascinating because they totally screwed up. And it's a big turning point for the UK system when they realized that the old model of the archaeological inspector, the enforcement of law control, was no longer relevant. The heritage practitioner was an advocate, a facilitator, which is very similar to our historic urban centers. Your mandate changes. You're motivating others to do the work. And I think where many of our ministries, not just Italy, are failing, I take another example, Daniela, which is religious heritage. Often there's such a failure to give due credit to all the religious communities that are managing a huge amounts of our heritage. And if you look at periodic reporting for World Heritage, often the Directorate of Heritage will say, we're the main manager. No, the main manager is the church. And the Directorate of Heritage is simply facilitating, guiding, advising, monitoring, controlling. And this is the problem. We have these military-like organograms suggest, it's control. And I mean, when I was on the Superior Council for the ministry in Italy, the relationship to religious heritage is releasing some money. There's no genuine conversation. And I think that's absolutely exactly the same problem with historic urban areas. So the questions of our two colleagues in the chat are exactly the point. It so depends on what you're looking at. Are you looking at facilitating others' role? Or are you in a lead management institution for a place for defense, an archaeological site, a very specific protected area, and so on? So it changes madly. But yes, up with everything that isn't a heritage authority.
It's true.
Are there comments, questions, or you can write? It was a constructive.
There's quite a detailed question from Derek Moore.
Yeah,
Mrs. Thompson.
Yeah, that goes to the heart of of a lot of our challenges in how each heritage system, and this is another area where I really agree with Lucas-Anne that as a sector, we're really rubbish at doing decent management research and decent comparative analyses. And all our work on the 2013 manual for World Heritage, you know, people look at it and go, well, it's not really rocket science. The whole point was to try and get down to the lowest common denominator basics that let you compare two things that don't seem comparable. And if we don't kind of get better at standardizing our comparative analysis frameworks, we'll never talk to each other. With regard, you know, the ultimate, which is residential urban areas, which, you know, they don't get in lots of legal systems, they don't get special fancy listing. They might be a generic conservation area. Who's really doing the hard work? It's the owners, you know, who repair the gutters and mend the roofs with loads of restrictions and complications, because unfortunately for them, their house is a heritage asset. Where we're being really weak is not ever commenting on these realities with a rigorous compare and contrast system, as in, is this a legal system that says everything's heritage over 50 years old unless you say it isn't? Or is it a heritage system based on lists of identified good things? That changes so much the culture of management of our urban areas, just like it does our agricultural areas or our natural landscapes. And we don't tend to be rigorous in setting that premise before we start commenting. And this is the sickness of management plans, and then Daniel showed up some of this, you know, even a very rigorous, good management plan, if you're not contextualizing it, and it's going to the World Heritage Committee as a kind of health check on are they doing a good job, it's meaningless. So we do have a massive challenge to up our game. And unfortunately, there's a huge explosion of heritage masters, PhDs, but very few of them are going to the ABC of management literacy. So many of them are looking at the kind of fluffy, nice parts, values, valorization, tourism, benefits, you know, tree hugging. But they're not going to the dirty fundamentals of what constitutes success. Anything to add, others?
No, I mean, I was just thinking in terms of, you know, good and bad practice, but also even in the best practice, in my experience, you know, it's an issue of basic knowledge of people working in the heritage field. I mean, the presentation that Maria was given in terms of a financial statement analysis of who knows which entities looking in dialogue with other stakeholders, community, etc. But that's something which is always missing, you know, whether you consider all the aspects, the different meanings, the plurality of meanings of a variety of constituents, somehow someone that should manage it or coordinate it, trying to see, okay, that is doable or not. I mean, otherwise we are completely free to speak and wording freedom, as we say in Italian. You know, I can say everything. It's nice speech, but this is not managing. It's not getting things done. You know, it's the capability of, you know, what is still interesting. I mean, in the debate, even within this context of this, you know, our world heritage, that once again, it's a topic. It's a marginal topic, and it's not such a sexy topic. I mean, a lot of things are more fun to discuss in terms of, you know, academic interest, in terms of research, in terms of social commitment, involvement, engagement. Then you have to talk about budget. No budget. I'm not saying no budget, no outcomes, but with no budget, high risks of no outcomes.
But Luca, can I just, Luca,
yeah,
can I
just one thing? One of the things that you know, when Dan worked with us, Dan is a true humanist. It's an archaeologist, and when he came with us and was working with us for a few years, and it was really, I never had any single class on these issues, you know, in terms of the skills or the, you know, when you talk about the amount of words wasted in terms of management, and the amount of words that are never told to an archaeologist or a cultural mediator or whatever in terms of cost, budgets, which is better. And then it's very risky because someone else that do not understand anything, as you were saying before, will take over. So that is how Pompeii get out with a structure which is really a scandal on its own in terms of the manpower structure, because heritage people gave it up, never spent time thinking on that.
Yeah. I was just looking at our colleague Derek Moore's question. I was just going to add one thing, Luca, that the question about residential urban fabric, which echoes a little bit my frustration with religious heritage and a lot of public institutions not giving due attention to the capacity, the heritage management capacity offered by other actors. I do think us management people would do better to apply our kind of management analyses, not just to classic sites, or I mean, even the urban areas, as Dan was doing, is a good challenge, but that somehow we give a value, a management capacity value to what private owners are doing in the equation. They are human resources, just like the priests are who open and close the doors of a monastery every day. And we're not very good at putting all those civil society contributions on the map when we evaluate capacity to do things. It's something that's being done better in societies that depend on NGOs. And I speak of the UK or New Zealand, or even the Balkans are full of NGOs trying to fill gaps for state authorities, where because an NGO tends to, as a charity, have to be transparent. They tend to have to demonstrate their capacity and what they got for the money. Whereas too often our public institutions, as Daniela says, both municipalities, not just heritage agenda institutions, don't give importance to all those civil society management capacities. So I think we could do a better job at studying that more. And that's very true for residential areas in cities. Like 70% of the hard work is not done by the institution, if not 90%. Any
by the way, who was talking? Was someone prepared a question? I was just wondering. I mean, the few of us that are doing, we Maria and myself, we are academic. Jane and Dan, they are real person working.
We get our hands dirtier.
the real world. But those of us that doing seriously management research in the field, we are always very interested and available in having kind of, contact and exchange with people. We all have a lot of students that we would like to send for internship. So this is something that, in case you have something that you would like to share, it could be a possibility in terms of having someone.
Luca, I can offer a testimony as somebody who's worked with the Bologna University on management research. And I can tell you, when we were in Herculaneum 10 years ago, we wanted fresh eyes on how things were working. And we had Luca Zan and his team come in and try and kind of see what was happening. And it's terribly annoying and time consuming because these guys want data. They want hard data. They don't care about good intentions. They want hard data. But there's a kind of brutality to that process that's very, very healthy. I mean, from the field, but I also develop resources for ECROM and UNESCO. Sometimes I'd say, you management researchers need to be more holistic because it is, there's a whole world around the thing you're trying to health check. But that process of a Luca Zan or whoever it is coming and trying to understand exactly what's happening. I mean, the one revelatory experience I had of working with the Bologna Luca was when you were so shocked, and rightly so, that there was only one tool that was recounting retrospectively what was happening in Pompeii and Herculaneum. in the 10 years our partnership had been going on. This was a public-private partnership for Herculaneum. And it was an academic publication that's the kind of chronicles of what happens every year in Pompeii and Herculaneum, published by the Friends of Pompeii. So a voluntary organization doing its noble best to get publications out. And every year it published a kind of resume of things that had happened that year. And because it was systematic and annual, it was the only systematic mapping of progress. And there was nothing in the state organization that mapped progress. And there still isn't today, notwithstanding a massive and often good reform that tries to turn that around. So we are really failing still. And I speak also on behalf of a private foundation. We're so often the non-profit actors, I speak also of NGOs, we're also not good enough at transparency compared to the culture sector, compared to other sectors. If you look at the health sector, other sectors that deal with collective goods, water, food aid, health, education.
Green,
you just have to look at philanthropy in the US. They're so much more rigorous about the way they use resources. And so I think we have a problem both within the institutions, within the NGO players, in the culture sector. We're slightly complacent. Is that fair, Luca?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember with Maria, I mean, when we got this, this table, cost us 3 months of work, which is a lot. But then we sent to the coordinator of the World Bank project of the time, and it was very helpful with us. And they wrote me back, thanks, Luke and Maria. We never got this information. We never understood the financial business model. Come on, you have the World Bank. You could, it's sure that we are brilliant, so clever, but you could have, bought the service of and do this work. And the same with UNESCO, never understood the kind of internal conflict and internal fight on money. How is it possible? Once again, going back to Gramsci, that's the first time in my life I'm publicly quoting
Gramsci madly.
Yeah, it's really, I'm not sure that we will solve your problems as management expert, but we will avoid many troubles in a sense.
You don't solve problems. You simply possibly inform a slight improvement.
Exactly. It's just trying to reduce the risk of the risk of our action inactive.
No, I would love to see more master's level studies that really tackle management in a more heritage management in a more rigorous way. It's a real challenge because clearly the moment you try and deal with too many heritage types, it's very difficult. But yes, I don't know how it needs tackling, but maybe it's in groups, I don't know, but it's a big gap, notwithstanding the explosion of good heritage masters. Not many of them are approaching this convincingly.
Research costs a lot.
Yeah. And often what we're needing is mid-career literacy, which is a lot of the challenge ECROM's had of bringing in, a paper conservator or a World Heritage Site manager who trained as an art historian or an archaeologist and building management literacy. And it's we know it's like trying to learn to drive when you're 50 now. It's a lot more difficult than when you're 20. It's the same. So it is a very uphill. This generation, hopefully, maybe the next generation will be a little bit more agile in these areas. Fingers crossed.
Okay. So any other questions, comment? Don't be shy, don't be timid. Daniele, your microphone is closed, so.
Sorry. No, I was saying that there are only thanks in the chat, so.
So that's okay.
It's so difficult to, when you're trying to follow what we are talking about, then the chat, then
yes.
This is the last time we're doing on a distance.
Yes, okay. Next time it will be in presence.
Okay.
Well, having said this, may I say what a privilege it is to have such a diversity of I think for looking at the names, we have an audience from very many different parts of the world, which we would not
Yes,
reach
it is.
with
Yes,
the same.
indeed.
We would
Yeah,
not reach with the same ease through traditional learning environments.
sure.
So let's remember the good side of this,
this is
and hope
true.
that
This is true.
and hope that more this program of events of our World Heritage. Let's hope it will provoke some new research initiatives, new partnerships between sites, new recognition of common ground between what seems different realities, but actually are often very similar. So I hope this series of very noble events being organised by our hosts will have that impact, to create a kind of new ferment around these topics that are still not quite solved. That would be the best finale we could have from these series of events.
Da donna serve a tutti
There's
gli
a question's
Use-
just come in about
that's-
Venice.
Oh, if we start talking about Venice, we'll never.
It's a separate world, because these guys can talk about it for 12 hours on the trot.
Yeah. You say Venice is a separate world. Will you discuss that? I mean, you, Daniele, so say that it's a separate world. But I think it's really at the best. You know, I think this is really the best example of the huge challenges that all of us have. I mean, I've just finished a 30
Yes,
hours
I know.
seminar on that. And
I know.
But it's so,
But you see, the problem is that I hear the same words since I was born. So I begin to
yes
think
and
that,
not. Yes and not. Yes and not.
Oh, yes.
Yes and not. I mean, there was a debate on Venice by UNESCO. I mean, and the reports of UNESCO.
Yes, UNESCO.
Which I mean, in this community could have opened a great discussion in terms of that. You know, not in terms of how good we are in solving the problem. I mean, it's such a difficult problem, but just in terms of addressing, in terms of managing the context. And I don't think it's so different. I mean, it's so representative of conflicts, of strong interest, declining kind of sense of civil engagement.
No, my point is that Venice is such a specific city and such a specific and peculiar place that for many reasons cannot be compared to other, including the fact that it's no longer a city. That's the big problem. You know, a few days ago, I was just in front of the very famous Farmacia Morelli.
Sure.
There is a place in Venice where you have the number of inhabitants continuously updated based on the municipality data. And last week it was 50,000, 600 inhabitants. When I was a boy, we were 170,000. So you understand the difference.
But Daniele, may I just add
that was
on
overcrowded,
Venice?
by the way. That was in Venice.
But it was crowded because there were the refugees, from the Second World War. But in a few years, in the 60s, there were already 150,000. So I mean, that was more feasible. That was the historical population of the city. Now Venice is no longer a city from the social point of view. Let's put it like that.
No, I just make one comment on Venice. It's looking backwards, and it's easy to be clever after the event, but it's a classic tribute to when our sector failed to see that people were part of the heritage value, and our failure to understand that heritage wasn't a pile of monuments and was a whole ecosystem. And I mean humans in the ecosystem. So our seascapes, our lagoons were off the radar. It was a different department. It was a coastal authority. And so that inability to work through between sectors, big port interest, tourist sector not working with heritage agendas, heritage authorities being defensive, municipalities having their own agendas. So it's a wonderful tribute to, I suppose what our dear friend Brundtland was trying to say in the 80s. If sectors generally follow their own agenda and it's difficult, it's unlikely they're going to hang out with the other people's agendas. And that's the real effort that the 2030 goals ask us to do. Step out of our little box and work with other sectors' agendas as well. And I think Venice, what's happened in Venice is a tribute to what happens if you don't get out of your sectorial silo and talk to the others. That's what you produce. For me, it's a learning ground for
absolutely. I agree with that.
sectorial silos, and they're not yet solved. There's a lot of people still in their silos.
It's a good gym. If you understand, just understanding them is not solving the problem. You know,
exactly. I'm not solving
the kind of contradictions.
What I see is that the people, even the young, you know, who are fighting, for instance, against the big cruiser, most of them are foreigners. There are no Venetian. Venetians have sold their city.
My Venetian relatives are in Mestre. They're not there anymore.
And Daniele is in Ferrara. So.
My sister as well, she lives in Mestre.
Where are you, Daniele? Where are you?
That's why they're foreigners, Daniele, because all the Venetians are somewhere else.
But if I want to hear Venetian dialect, I go to Mestre, not to Venice.
Exactly. That's where we went wrong.
So that's finished. So when I was in Venice, it looks like being I don't know, in Abu Dhabi or
we killed the ecosystem, humans included. That's what we managed.
Yeah,
we put it on a pedestal.
No. What I'm saying is that when I say that it's a separate world, mostly because of the social situation, and mostly because, you know, the fact that the tourism has completely distorted all the possible activities in the city.
Absolutely.
If you are going to buy a newspaper, it's difficult to find a newspaper because it's hidden behind the mask, the carnival mask. And you have seen, like me, how the carnival was created from the scratch in '81. You understand that the carnival is a totally I could say exogenous phenomenon.
Okay, I think that we.
Well, so I have to start another panel.
Yes, and I think if we start a discussion on Venice, we'll never.
I need to rest, to drink a coffee.
So
yes, but to conclude, we can learn a lot from Venice. It's not it's a great learning.
Sure.
Back soon on
but even from Florence, next time, let's talk about Florence.
Okay, so we can compete on that. So
it is even worse than Venice. Okay.
Let's talk on that. That's the topic of the next discussion. So let me thank all the presenters. I don't see Dan Schumann. Maybe you can. Thanks everyone. Thanks all the listeners. Sorry, we were not even able to see your face or to listen to your voice, which I hate. Next time, let's see, we will meet again. Don't know where, but I'm sure we'll meet again.
Somewhere.
Sunny day. Okay. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.